Hey guys, this is Brandon McGee from the McGee Law Firm, and today, very fortunate here to have Sean Pacelli and Brian Armstrong from Armstrong and Pacelli Financial Planners. And this is another installment of Interview with the Experts. And so what we're going to be talking about today, guys, is the CARES Act that was passed this past spring in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But first, I want to welcome you guys here. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And so I know you guys fairly well, but give our clients, our audience here. We'll start with you, Shandi. A little bit of your professional background.
So I started off in the financial arena, financial services, in about 1998. I had had some financial services experience before that, but really diving into investment planning in about 1998.
When you were 6 years old?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, right.
Exactly. When I was 6, I was a prodigy.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And Brian and I met at that firm back in 1998, and then we started our own financial planning practice in 2008.
Okay, wonderful.
And have had our own independent firm since then. And we're both certified financial planning practitioners.
Okay.
We are co-owners and partners and wealth planners of our firm, Armstrong Pacelli Wealth Management Group.
Okay.
And so it is our initial role. We are meeting with clients and helping them through all those financial planning matters.
Okay, and I know you guys' office, it's kind of on the Bedford-Colleyville line, is that right?
I think we're actually across the street from Colleyville.
Right.
Our office is in Bedford, but literally across the street where there's houses and neighborhoods is Colleyville, I think.
Okay, and then tell us a little bit about what's kind of your reach as far as your clientele. Are you all over DFW with clients, or how does that look?
Yeah, it's a pretty big radius. We used to have an office in North Dallas and in Fort Worth.
Okay.
So as clients retired, I just say it's the Metroplex.
Right.
You know, Prosper to Weatherford to Cleburne to Rockwall. So
which that covers a lot of territory these days,
covers
right?
the Metroplex.
Yeah, all the way up to the Red River almost now.
Yeah. Well, most clients are still here, but a lot of those have retired and moved
different places.
to different places. So I think we've got probably 10 to 15 states where clients live.
Okay, wonderful. So y'all have a big reach. And so today, again, we're going to talk about the CARES Act. So, Shandi, tell me, just kind of give us a general overview of that, please.
So I think the main purpose of the CARES Act was to really open and expand the ability for individuals like all of us, and either whether you're working for yourself or working for a company, to get to some of those retirement assets for relief from maybe some job hardships and those types of things. So today, really, the CARES Act, the part that we're going to, I think, focus on mainly is with regards to how it changed the ability to get to retirement assets, such as your employer-sponsored plans, 401ks, for example, and your IRAs.
And I'm curious, is it actually that a withdrawal can be made, or is it loans being made against the plans, or what? How does that look?
It's actually both.
It's both.
So the first thing that you want to do when we're looking at it, number one, it expanded the ability to take distributions, and it increased the loan amount.
Okay.
So first of all, you want to be sure that you're a qualified individual.
Okay.
In other words,
let's talk about that. So what is who is qualified to take advantage of this under this COVID situation?
Right. So pretty much anybody that's been affected in any shape, form, or fashion from COVID. So if you had to be quarantined, if you were told to quarantine, maybe because of a contact tracing, right? Then they got a hold of you and said you needed to quarantine. If you lost your job, if you were furloughed, if you're laid off, if your hours decrease. It even goes into an affected person being someone that maybe can't find childcare. Now the schools are closed or daycares are not running.
So would it be fair to say that it's broad enough that most people could probably find a reason if they wanted to be a qualified person?
I would say that's probably true. Of course, you do have to realize that there is an IRS code for what's considered qualified. And so you do want to be able to.
But a lot of people would fit in one of those boxes.
Probably. I think these days that's probably true. And I think they realize that. That's why they did paint it with such a broad brush. You know, and I didn't mention this, if you actually have COVID, you're a qualified person.
Of course, right, yes.
Or your spouse or a member of your family. So the first thing that we want to do is level one, make sure that we qualify for that enhanced distribution or that enhanced loan.
And now tell us so let's pretend if I'm a qualified person and let's say that I have $250,000 in a 401k and $100,000 in an IRA. what are my options as a qualified person?
So let's talk about both. If you're over 59 and a half, we're not dealing with that 10% penalty anyway. Right?
Okay.
So if you are a qualified person,
Yeah.
so we've met that eligibility requirement, and we're now looking at our 401k. We can take up to $100,000 from that 401k
Okay.
without that 10% penalty.
Okay, wonderful. For
The-
anybody regardless of age.
Anybody regardless of age.
Okay.
The thing that is really nice too, in addition to not having that 10% penalty, is you now have the option to claim that on your tax return for 3 years.
Okay.
So we can spread it out, we can rate it, right, a third, a third, and a third over the next 3 years.
Okay.
Number 1 year being the year you take the distribution.
Got it.
Okay? So that's the first thing. It also allows you to take that same 100,000 if you want to, if you don't have a 401k but you have an IRA.
Right.
So we can pull that same $100,000 from the IRA. Now you can't do it in each, it's a collective $100,000.
Okay.
So if we take that from the IRA, the same rules apply. If you're not 59 and a half, we're looking at no 10% penalty and being able to minimize the tax impact potentially of the 100,000
Right.
on any one tax bill and spread that out over 3 years.
Okay.
Now I will say that it does, the 401k provider has to allow for it.
Okay.
So just because it is become approved in the act, in the CARES Act through the government and IRS, then the 401k plan has to allow it.
Okay, so the actual provider has to say we're okay with this. They don't have to participate in it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Do you guys have any feeling from the industry about, are most of the providers cooperating with this, or some of them not? What's your sense?
Here's my guess, but I don't know because I've not heard from anybody.
Okay.
Maybe Brian has a different story. I would guess most of your large providers
Are
that are more nimble
Okay.
at writing and changing their plan
yeah.
are probably making that accommodation.
Yeah.
My guess is that maybe some of the smaller employers where it's
Okay.
maybe a cost burden to rewrite their plan in the middle of the year, you might see some of those that may have a harder time evolving into the new rules, right? So
Yeah.
I would just check if you're one of those people that are looking, you don't have an IRA, you are falling on hardship, you do qualify as a qualified person, is to call your employer and ask specifically about that rule and whether or not they're gonna make those accommodations.
Okay, now let's say that, again, I have a 401k with $250,000 in it, and I want to take advantage of this, and I find out that my provider does not allow for that. Is it possible to roll over my 401k with a different, maybe larger provider that would allow me to do this, or am I just stuck with not being able to access the money?
So it's go ahead, sorry.
We're typically stuck. I mean, if that's the
Okay.
company provided 401k,
Okay,
unless there's provisions inside of it to maybe roll some of that money over to an IRA,
okay,
but you're not gonna be able to get out of that 401k to another 401k, even if you
Got
have
it.
a job, right, most likely. So if
Okay.
that 401k disallows the CARES Act,
right,
relief,
mhm,
right, then you just hope you have an IRA.
okay,
Now, there could be an opportunity if you had a 401k and if they allowed for a rollover to an IRA to
Okay.
create some flexibility.
got it. So it just depends on different factors,
Yes.
but there might be some people out there that unfortunately can't take advantage,
Right.
potentially.
Let's talk
Okay.
about that because you bring up another question is what about the loan component?
Yeah, okay, yeah,
So let's just say that you don't have access for distribution in the provisions. Currently, the way loan provisions work based on regulation is that an employee can only take either a certain percentage of the balance of their 401k or $50,000.
okay,
Okay, so there's some work that has to be done to really determine how much an employee under normal rules can take out, but it's never more than 50,000. I think
Got
it's
it.
50% of the balance up to 50,000.
Right.
okay. And so
What the CARES Act did is they increased it to 100,000.
100, okay,
So now instead of taking just a $50,000 distribution,
right,
they can now take up to a $100,000 distribution, and they have an extra year to pay it back
okay,
for any loan payments that were due between March of 27th or
Mhm.
21st of 2020 through the December 30th of
Right.
2020.
to the end of this year,
They have
okay.
an extra
An
year.
extra year.
An extra year, okay, all right. And then, so, yeah, let's talk a little bit more about repayment and the repayment options. What does that look like? I mean, you can repay this if you want, but if you take the withdrawal out, you can eventually put the money back in if you want without tax consequences, but you don't have to. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
So the old rule, a lot of times, if you were able to successfully pull money out of an IRA, you had 60 days to get it back into another plan, and the IRS would kind of shut their eyes and pretend you didn't do it.
Okay.
Right? You can only do that once a year.
Okay.
Now what they are allowing is a 3-year payback.
Okay.
So almost like the 3-year, you can phase out the taxes or take the taxes in incremental parts over 3 years. They now are allowing the payback over 3 years.
Okay.
So within 3 years, you can either partially pay it back or pay all of it back, and then that would reduce your tax burden. So
Okay.
it's now a 3-year rollover, if you will, instead of a 60-day rollover.
And so the max on all this is 100,000. Is that right? Now, what if I have 2 different 401ks? Is it 100,000 per 401k? Or if my spouse has a 401k, we can both do it?
Spouses would be different. So
Okay.
it's based on individual.
Okay.
So if you have 100,000 that you can pull out of one of your plans and 100,000 on your spouse's plan.
Okay.
Now, I'm not an IRS expert and I'm not
Right.
a tax expert, but the way that I have read the rule, which is actually, I pulled up on the Internal Revenue Service online and the code, it doesn't, and it may somewhere in there specifically say that it is a combined 100,000, but I think that's presumed that it's 100,000 per taxpayer ID.
Okay.
Is how I would view that.
Okay, now here's an interesting question, or I think it is because I came up with it, maybe it's not. But if somebody came to you and said, look, I'm a qualified person, one of your clients, and but I don't really need this money, I'm still doing okay, and I don't need to do this, I don't have to do this. Is there any way you could get creative and say, well, let's go ahead and take 100,000 out, and is there any thing you could do creatively maybe that would maximize that money, and it maybe would be better than having it in an IRA or 401k? Or would you tell that person, that's kind of risky, it seems pointless, just keep your money where it's at?
I would normally tell them keep where it's at.
Okay.
Right? You're not normally limited to your investment options inside of the IRA.
Right.
That's the umbrella of the title.
Right.
So I'm not going to really get any more creative in a non-qualified account.
Okay.
Let's not take the distribution typically if you don't need it and
Right.
create the tax nightmare potentially.
Sure.
And just leave it there.
And are there any are there any rules and regulations under the CARES Act about what you can do with this money, or could I take out $100,000 and go to Las Vegas and gamble it, or what does the government say about what you can do?
The tax code that I read doesn't say you can only spend it on certain things. It just
Okay.
says that you had to have a financial hardship, if you will, / consequence.
Right.
Okay.
Quarantine,
Of
furlough,
COVID.
Okay.
reduced hours.
So the presumption is that you're only taking this money if
If
you
you really
needed to
need it.
live off of,
Got it. Okay.
and you wouldn't be going to,
Okay.
doing something creative with
So
it.
even though the criteria to be a qualified person is fairly broad, still the underpinning idea is that this really should only be done. It is only really a good idea if you actually need the money to live off of. Is
Right.
that okay?
Yeah, I had a few calls early on from clients that read it and thought, oh, I can get to 100,000 and it's not going to have any negative consequences.
Right.
They read the big bold print.
Yes.
And when we realized this is just escaping that 10% penalty.
Right.
You're still going to owe all the taxes. This
Yes.
is probably a bad idea for
Right.
the most part.
But you're right, because you still have the tax
Right.
consequence. Okay.
And your future retirement and jeopardy
Right.
and things of that
So
nature.
if you pull out 100,000, even though you don't suffer the 10% penalty, you still have to claim that 100,000 as income for that year. Is that correct?
Over 3 years.
Oh,
Over 3 years. Okay, so
Right.
$33,000, and it's going to get taxed when
Right.
you file your income tax. Okay, and then so I know there were some other kind of smaller things that happened within the CARES Act. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the big ones we've used a lot is the suspension of the required minimum distributions.
Okay.
So if you were told that you
Yeah.
had to take an RMD because of your age,
Right.
this year there was an abatement of that. You didn't have to, including inherited IRAs.
Okay.
So we reached out to all of our clients that were in that age bracket,
Right.
made it available or aware to them, and many
And that's
people.
70 and a half. Is that right?
Well,
Is that-
interesting,
Yeah.
because the Secure Act, which I know we kind of thought we might cover today just
Right.
a little bit, the Secure Act that was also passed recently moved that age from 70 and a half to 72.
That's right. Okay. Okay. So for your clients who are 72 and or older, or for your clients who inherited the non-spouse inheritor, they were having to take RMDs, correct?
Right.
And that's suspended until when? Do you know
Right now
that?
this year.
Just for 2020.
Right. We can guess if that's going
And
to
I'm curious, what's the reason behind that? Do y'all know?
Yeah, there's a lot of clients that don't need it. And so
Okay.
the hardship was I'm being forced to take it out, not spend it, but
Right.
pay my 10, 15, 20% in tax, and I didn't
Okay.
need it. So it was like, well, if you don't need it, let's not make those people
Okay.
take it out this year.
Because we have enough other people taking extra money out of plans. Let's not make people who don't want it.
Well, I can
take it
also
out.
presume, and this is just a presumption on my part, that because maybe there was some market downturn
Right.
to
Right.
force those age 72
Okay.
year old plus people that really didn't need the money
Yeah.
And we're nervous at
Right.
the same time. And
to have them cash out of their investments while they were down due to
Okay.
the market being down because of
Makes
COVID.
sense.
Maybe they just decided, look, go ahead and leave it in there, let
Okay.
it recover, and then we'll maybe start those R&Ds back up next year. I'm assuming here, but I think that part of the reason was because of the market downturn, not forcing the distribution,
Okay.
and the tax consequence on that distribution, and having the tax consequence and selling in that down market.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the Secures Act. Or the Secure Act. So that came out in December of 2019, correct? Okay. So tell us, and that was pre-COVID, right? So it technically has nothing to do with COVID.
Right.
But tell us kind of the basics behind that, so that we kind of get a big picture here of what's happened in the last year with retirement assets.
So just kind of in a nutshell, the major two things, and this can get really deep in the weeds real quick, so I'll try to keep it high level. The first thing, like we just talked about, was the required minimum distribution age from 70 and a half to 72.
Okay.
The next thing is pretty profound. The next thing that they did, let's talk about the way the rule was. The way the rule was with regards to IRA assets upon your death, your beneficiary, if that beneficiary is your spouse, they could then take that IRA over as their own,
Right.
using their own life expectancy,
Okay.
right? And then they could do with that just as if they were you, and now they're the true owner of the IRA.
Okay.
Non-spouses really could not do that.
Right.
Right. So if you were in the past a non-spouse beneficiary, no matter how old you were when you inherited that
Mhm.
IRA, you were forced to start taking out distributions.
And am I right that prior to this act, you had to do that within 5 years?
It depends, right?
Okay.
There's a few different rules. If you were
Okay.
going to do what's called a stretch IRA, you had to start
Right.
doing that by the next year.
Okay.
Okay.
but then you could stretch it over your life
Life.
expectancy.
Life
So
expectancy.
you're taking out small amounts.
Yeah, but if you
Very
didn't make that election, then oops, I've got the end of the 5th year.
Okay. All right.
So it was kind of twofold in there.
Okay.
So
And
it required some planning.
but now it's 10 years, right? Is that
So
one
now
of the
what
changes?
has happened is when that non-spouse inherits that IRA, they no longer can stretch that distribution out over their lifetime.
Okay.
They have to have that IRA distributed completely within 10 years.
Okay.
Now
But to
that
be
means-
clear, the spouse doesn't have that problem.
The
It's
spouse doesn't have
the next
problem.
generation.
It's the next generation.
Okay.
What the CARES Act really designed to do was the IRS, in a sense, if you will, the government, in a sense, said, we did not plan on having IRAs create multi-generational wealth.
Okay.
And IRAs were doing that. People that were really just, non-spouse, a 20-year-old inheriting a $3 million IRA,
Yeah.
they could take out a very small piece throughout their
Right.
life expectancy and
Right.
still continue to see this IRA grow in
Although
tax
most
deferral.
20-year-olds would probably burn through it in
Most-
5 years.
Most do, but,
That's a red car.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
And so what the IRS said was, this is creating so much tax deferral in the system,
Yeah.
in my opinion, we are gonna stop that. This is gonna
Okay.
be, we want the tax deferral, we want the tax revenue,
Right.
to generate it, and so we're gonna force the distribution in 10 years. Now, they can take it all at once, they can take it over 10 years, or they can take it in year 10.
Okay.
And what we're seeing is now that is really starting to change planning.
Okay.
For not only the person that owns the IRA,
Yeah.
but for that legacy asset as well. So we're really sitting down and having conversations about what does it mean when your child inherits this IRA with X dollars left over. And really the conversation is as specific as really how much money that client has.
Yeah.
Right? If we're looking
Sure.
at a very small client, we think they're going to, burn through their IRA during
Right.
their life. There's not really a whole lot of planning because of this new rule.
Okay.
If we're looking at clients that are legacy planning and
Yeah.
they know they're going to have IRA,
They have a 7-figure estate.
exactly,
like
they're
that,
not going
right.
to use all that money during their life. That's really when this rule
Okay.
starts to become potentially a problem, and we can do some proactive planning during their life
Right.
to maybe change that tax trajectory going.
Okay. All right. And then I had some great question and it just totally slipped my mind. But
A lot of that was maybe that Roth conversion plan.
oh, I know the
Right.
great question. Okay, so it's probably a stupid question, but you guys are talking about IRAs. Does the Secure Act, does it also apply to 401ks? Is it the same rules for 401ks?
Right.
Okay.
As in regards to the required minimum distributions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And also in regard to the having to remove the funds within 10 years,
On
having
the
to withdrawal
non-spouse.
of the non-spouse.
Right.
Okay, so everything's the same there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It created a massive amount of tax revenue.
Okay.
The numbers came out, and by them disallowing the stretch and forcing over 10 years, I can't remember what it was, but it's a number.
I think it's in the trillion.
Yeah, it was a big number.
Don't quote me
Okay.
on that, but I think, yeah.
And let me ask you guys this. So if right now with the climate that we're in, where we have this virus, we're kind of in uncharted territory. The market's been kind of up and down. We have, then we have this huge presidential election coming up where everybody's real divided, and it's a year of turmoil, right? We got 5 hurricanes and wildfires in the West and all sorts of crazy stuff. Tell me, if you're talking to somebody, I'm in my mid-40s, so if you're talking to somebody my age, what kind of advice are you giving them right now? Somebody who's still working, somebody who has kids that they're still raising, and then if somebody is, let's say they're 70 and they just retired, what kind of advice are you giving them right now in 2020?
Right, really, really different from the 40-year-old to the 70-year-old.
Yeah.
So I would say the advice we're giving the 65, 70-year-old hasn't changed, in that it's really important to probably have your assets in specific buckets, if you will.
Right.
Let's make sure we have enough money to live on for 1 to 5 years.
Sure.
So that we're not impacted by the election or by COVID or
Right.
we
The
are,
market turmoil.
Right.
Right.
And then maybe we've got that second bucket, that's your 6 to 10 year bucket,
Okay.
and then that third bucket, for 10 years. Plus, with a 40-year-old probably, right, that's pumping away into a 401k and wants to stay aggressive, probably doesn't need to do that, but still,
Okay.
let's have the conversation.
Right.
So it's just different planning depending on
Got it.
40 to 70 for sure.
But is a lot of it like, hey, don't panic, this will pass and everything will be fine? I'm sure that's a lot of what you've been telling people.
Right.
Or
We definitely prefer people not panic.
right.
That is number one. We don't like panic.
Well, point proven. It happened in March,
Yeah.
and I had one client panic.
Right.
Got out at the worst possible time. We discussed it. Is mad at himself.
Right.
We've talked several times. We've gotten some back.
Okay, guys, one last question before we kind of talk to you all about how our audience here can contact you. But so we had, let's say, the stock market the first week of March before the COVID hysteria hit, and the stock market to where it is right now in mid-September. How do the two compare? Have we bounced all the way back, or what are your thoughts on that?
If you look back from that point to now, it's pretty close.
Okay.
Right, just depending on what index you might be looking at, but it's
Right.
really close to back to where it was.
So some stocks may be higher, some may be lower, but across the board, we're pretty close to the same level.
That's right.
Okay. And then, so guys, let us know for our audience here, who's the people who will be watching this over the next few months, how can they contact you guys?
I think the best way, which is everyone's calling card today, is our website.
Okay.
So it's my last name Armstrong, her last name Pacelli, wealthmanagementgroup.com.
Okay.
It's armstrongpercelli.com.
Oh, there you go. So it's not even
Right.
it's, or I think you can even do apwmg.com.
Okay. And are you guys on,
ArmstrongPercelli.com.
are y'all on social media? Do you have a Facebook presence? Can people find you on Facebook?
Sure can.
Okay.
Yes.
And for the first consultation, is that something that's complimentary? Do you charge for that?
We don't.
And do you all, if you have a client who calls you from, East Dallas or McKinney and they don't want to drive to Bedford, what do you do with that situation?
Especially these days, people aren't doing a lot of face-to-face meetings.
Right.
So we can Zoom in if we want, but we found a lot of people really don't even want to do that. Like, we don't need to see you, we can just talk over the phone. So we have some great software that allows us to actually build a financial plan with a shared screen.
Okay.
So we can start working on building
Awesome.
some financial planning. We can do a lot of it virtually. We can do a lot of the legwork without you being in front of us.
Okay.
And we don't ever charge for those meetings.
Right.
So a lot of times we'll get clients that come in and they're not ready to invest with us yet because maybe the bulk of their investments are in their 401k.
Got it. So, well, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Yeah.
It was, I learned a lot today. I'm sure everybody else who is going to watch this is going to learn a lot too. And guys, please give them a call if you have any questions for them. You'd like to meet with them to talk to them about handling your finances. Please give these guys a call, okay?
And I'll give our number.
Yes.
817-952-7260.
Okay. So that's the number. And then also you can find them on Facebook and just on the web in general. But thank you guys so much.
Thanks for
thanks
having
for
us.
having
We
Yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
Thank you.
This is
All right.
good.
Take care, guys.